So the emotion is, I can't handle emotion. That's the feeling inside of you, a terror about emotion.
Yeah, overwhelmed, basically, being taken over.
Yeah, a terror about being overwhelmed by your emotional experience, shall we say. Right? So the question then becomes, where did that terror come from and how did it get established? Doesn't it? So if that's the terror about feeling any emotion of any kind, then and by the way, most men on the planet have this terror. Women generally have less terror about it because for most men, whenever they felt emotion, there was more violence. For most women, whenever they feel emotion, there's less violence, generally speaking. And this is why men are generally more terrified of their emotions than women are, right? Men have then a desire to live in their mind. And that's why they start to embrace everything intellectually and they start detuning from their emotion quite significantly because they want to live in their mind, because in their mind they can control the past experience of violence about their emotions, right? So fundamentally, you could say there's a reason why the emotion exists as to I can't handle things, I can't handle emotion, right? Which is really, you could say, we called it in 2016 a global terror, which exists in almost all of humanity, of emotion. Right? Now, in 2016, we did a series of groups, 5-day groups. I think they were 5 days, yeah. And I think it was the second group, which was called...
Developing My Loving Self.
Developing My Loving Self, wasn't it? The first one was Understanding My Loving Self, and then was Developing My Loving Self.
So it could be.
I can't quite remember the... It's in 2016. If you look on the downloads page, events, and you select events, and then underneath you select 2016, you'll see them listed there. This global terror of emotion is like I don't believe much in conspiracy theories, right? But this is a conspiracy. The conspiracy is humans can't handle emotion in a loving manner. Emotion is what causes all of human problems, is the general conspiracy. And most of us have bought it off. And most of us have a severe amount of terror about even just being overwhelmed with a little bit, just a little bit of emotion even. We're terrified of feeling things. And because of that, we don't believe we are capable. The soul was created to be an emotional experience, like we said earlier. Remember when Hannah asked that question, it was like everything God designed, joy, happiness and everything, is going to be an emotional experience. And everything humans create, sin, suffering, pain, they are also going to be emotional experiences. But the majority of us are so worried about having any emotional overwhelm at all that that's our primary sin. So the primary sin becomes this terror of emotion that exists within. And that terror of emotion drives most of our action. It will drive a series of belief systems, spiritual beliefs. It'll drive as well. So spiritual beliefs like God's cruel, God's harmful, God wants me to feel and so God's punishing. I don't want to feel. God wants me to feel, that's bad. You know, so you start setting up beliefs even with God associated with your terror of emotional experience. And the problem with that is that we've got two sets of opposition internally to actually our growth in love. One set of opposition is emotional and the other sets of opposition are spiritual. And spiritual always generally have a hierarchy of being higher in hierarchy over emotion even. So we start imbibing spiritual beliefs about God. So an example of a spiritual belief is, I feel God is punishing. That's a spiritual belief. I feel God is cruel. I feel God doesn't care about me. They're all spiritual beliefs about God. And these beliefs finish up guiding many of my actions in terms of stopping me. There's justifications to not have to feel some fundamental emotions, which, and by the way, one of the hardest emotions you're ever going to have to feel, and this applies to all of you, is this. Terror is an emotion that I find most people are almost, they believe themselves to be, the spiritual belief is that they are unable to feel terror. That it's the thing you must avoid at all costs. Terror is the thing that must be avoided. And so anything that says, I need to feel terror, automatically we're starting to go, that's wrong, that's bad, that's not right, that's, we start treating it as if it's a false belief, right? And in the process of doing that, we're justifying it. And in fact, what most people don't realise is that terror, for most people, terror is just like a bit of a mound inside of their soul. But we turn it into a mountain by having these additional beliefs associated with it, right? So instead of it becoming just an experience I'm going to need to go through for a few weeks or a few months, and maybe even a year or two, like you might have to feel terror every day for a year or two, let's say. Because you think about childhood where it's violent, it was violent for 7 or 8, 10 years, 12 years, maybe 15 for some people. Then there's going to be a fair bit of terror associated with that violence, right, that they're going to have to experience now as an adult. That's sort of locked at that age, and you've got to become comfortable with feeling it, right? Once you feel that you can handle terror, you'll feel you can handle anything, right? And that's the beauty of being able to go through the emotion, is once you realise you can go through terror, you also realise you can go through any other emotion too. So my experience of terror has been, I had terror for nearly 6 years, had to feel for 6 years. And during that phase, I came to become very, very comfortable with feeling any other emotion as well, right? So that's the beauty of doing it. But it takes, this terror is actually infecting your spiritual beliefs. And that's why you said what you said about God and your feelings about God, is because this terror of your own feelings is actually creating in itself intellectual beliefs which support the suppression of the terror. And if you're not careful, you can create hundreds of beliefs internally, spiritual ones, about God and about how the universe is created and about the human soul, that it's not emotional. So we meet people, and these are, like an example of that is Buddhists. Most Buddhists have created a whole belief structure which is supporting 2 or 3 primary concepts. The first one is that emotions are bad. You don't need to feel them, you just need to detune from them. The second one is that beliefs are bad. So it's better to have no beliefs. That's how you remain calm, right? So they've actually created a belief system that believes in no beliefs. Does that make sense? Just because of the terror of emotion, they create a belief system that says, if I have to absorb a belief, then it's going to result in potentially internal confusion. Like I won't know what's, like I'll latch onto something being right and it might be wrong, right? So it's better to not think of right and wrong at all. So they come up with a belief structure that says there's no right and wrong. There's only love, but there's no right and wrong, is the general statement. But actually, there is right and wrong. What's loving is right and what's unloving is wrong. But even the belief system has been now created to support the detunement, the terror that they have about emotion. And the terror they have, and it creates a terror about belief, to the point where you'll construct an entire belief system that is all about not feeling and not having beliefs. Right? And that's how far we will go as humans when we try to detune from these feelings. So the question then becomes, what? How do I feel my terror? You know, that's
Exactly, yeah, what is start, yeah.
how do I get started with my terror? Well, when terror is within you, there are many attraction events. The law of attraction is working to trigger your terror. God knows that your terror is not good. So God's trying to create events, and the law is trying to create events so that you can gently go through your terror. God's not trying to scare you to death. He's just bringing events which cause you to have some terror within. And these events are there to help you experience terror. The key is what you do with them. The majority of persons use all sorts of techniques to avoid them. So, food, sex, action of some kind, distraction, technology. There's all these addictions that often people create just to avoid the feeling of terror. So, I've got to, number one, start unravelling my own addictions to how do I avoid the experience of terror. Every one of you will have different methods, and you've got to start unravelling it for yourself. For me, I worked like I was a workaholic. That was one way I avoided my terror. I was a planaholic, and what I mean by that is I was addicted to just planning out every single day, the next day, writing out what I was going to do the next day, what might go wrong the next day, how I would fix what might go wrong the next day. And you can imagine I'm not very calm doing any of this. So that's what I was doing, is planning out my life. In addition, I was doing things like choosing to use certain types of food, substances. Like for me, a bit of wine every night was great, I found. So I had a collection of wine, and I'd have a bit every night, you know. I would also have a lot of sugar in my diet, so ice cream was a big thing for me. Like when I ate ice cream, I'd get a 4-litre tub, which is 1 gallon tub, and I'd divide it into 4, and that's my next 4 nights ice cream, 1 litre at a time. So I found it very suppressive of my fear. So that's why I went for that. So yeah, of course, all of these things had negative consequences. And once I started realising those consequences, I stopped many of these addictions. The other thing is that you need to be able to sit with yourself for an extended period of time just feeling your fear. So what I taught myself to do was to lay on my bed, and I tried to do this for at least 2 hours a day, where I'd lay on my bed and I'd just feel the fear in my body. So I'd feel all of these sort of pains and fear, and like, you know how your nerves jangle when you're in a state of fear? I'd feel that for 2 hours. Every day I made a goal just to feel it. And in the process, memories would come up, and I would then be able to process the memories. And when the memories came up, some of my fear dissipated. So I had a lot of fear about torture and abuse and other things like that based on my first century life and memories. And so I had to go through them. So I went through all of those memories. And in the process, my fear diminished. My terror of emotion diminished as well. And the more I became confident in myself that I could handle emotion, the more emotion I could handle. It was sort of like a snowball gathering. So right at the beginning I was like incredibly afraid and terrified, while at the same time very detuned from the terror, very insensitive to it. And then as time went on, what happened was I became more and more in tune with it. I started to feel it in my body, to the point where I could every day for a couple of hours just feel my terror and also go through memories that caused that terror to exist, to the point where those memories went. I experienced them rather than holding on to them, and as a result, the terror diminished. Does that make sense?
It does. There's just like one big complication. Like I don't want to do that, so to say. So I have to force myself. I have to kind of like, doing the good thing is something that is a should. There's a should attached to that. I should be doing that.
Yeah, now this is a very good statement you made. I don't want to do it. Yep. Very important to recognise these statements. I don't want to. So let's look at I don't want to, shall we?
Yeah.
Right. What am I really saying? Yeah, it's sort of, I shouldn't have to is sort of like an extension of that, isn't it? I shouldn't have to. Yeah. But really, what's I don't want to? Is it a sad state? Is it a lacking in confidence state? Is it it's an angry state. Okay. So really, I don't want to is anger. Right. Okay. So basically you're saying, I'm angry about having to.
Yes.
Yes? So anger is the feeling. I'm angry about having to. What's the purpose of anger?
Actually, many things. The one thing is like the loneliness coming up when I stop, so to say, sort of my addictions or like, thinking, planning, whatever. When I just stop, one of the first things coming up is like loneliness, just emptiness.
Okay, so what's the purpose of anger really, if we look at it, is to gain power over other feelings, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so when you say to yourself, I don't want to, it's sort of a very gentle expression of anger, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of going, I'm in a bloody rage and I can't, like instead of feeling the passion of your rage about it, I don't want to is just, I don't want to. Like it's almost like a misrepresentation of the level of rage, isn't it, in a way? Yep. Firstly, obviously, you're going to have to connect to some of this anger somehow, right? Now, not for the purpose of keeping it, but for the purpose of recognising it and its purpose. See, the purpose of anger is to get some power over something else, over something you're scared of, something you're terrified of.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the purpose of the anger. So unless I start seeing the relationship between anger and my sin of trying to get power over other emotions, unless I recognise the purpose of anger, I'm going to feel very justified to keep on doing it. And if I keep on doing it, nothing's going to change, right? So I need to start seeing that anger is a fruitless emotion as well. At some point, I need to recognise that.
What it gives me something like, there's something I can do actually. I'm not just like being overwhelmed or taken over by some outer force, so to say.
Yep.
I'm not just being a slave and a servant.
Yeah, but it's interesting you keep saying, remember that is your false belief about God. God doesn't want you to be his servant or his slave. He wants you to be a self-responsible, self-actualised individual. But your false belief, which is he wants me to be his slave, is actually really your anger telling you a false belief so that you don't have to feel, so you can feel power over your terror.
Right.
So you keep mentioning the false belief, but in your heart you know it's a false belief, right?
I hope it's wrong. Otherwise, I just have to kill myself or whatever. Or hope I'm going to... I mean, really, if I'm living in a hostile universe, of course, there's no point of existing. So there's where I'm torn,
Of course, yeah. And again, another false belief that we're living in a hostile universe, right? I understand it, but can you see that also comes from your childhood?
I figure yes. Yeah. I mean, must have come, yeah.
It's got to come from your childhood, because how would you learn that we're living in a hostile universe and somebody else learns that they're living in a friendly one? Obviously, there's got to be something unique to your experience that that person hasn't had, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reality is the belief that we live in a hostile universe is supportive of the anger that allows you to have power over the terror you feel about just surrendering to the feelings that you had in your childhood about it being a hostile universe. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 So in other words, I've got to surrender to the belief that it was when I was a child in order to experience that feeling that I had as a child. And then as I release that, I will come to see that it's not a hostile universe, right? Now, if I don't want to do that, I've got to look at why do I want to hold on to the idea it's a hostile universe, right? And there's reasons, isn't there? And every one of those reasons is giving me power over things I don't want to do. Right? It makes me feel like I shouldn't have to do it. I shouldn't have to do this emotional thing. I shouldn't have to go to my sadness in particular. I shouldn't have to feel some of these feelings from my childhood, as an example. I should be able to sin because it's a hostile universe. You've got to sin in a hostile universe. This is how you cope with a hostile universe, is you give it back as much as it gives you. You know, these beliefs prevent you from understanding that the I don't want to is really a situation of anger, which is really power over a whole heap of emotion that you haven't wanted to feel and feel you shouldn't have to feel. Yep. And in fact, many people do feel that God is asking too much of them, in the sense that God's asking you to feel emotion you shouldn't have to feel. But the answer to that is, it's in you. And if you don't feel, it's going to kill you. Right? So it's better out of you than in you. Right? But most people don't believe that. They believe it's better to store emotion, even though eventually it kills them. They'd rather store it than feel it. So at some point, there's going to have to be some different decisions. And at the moment, you're very much gravitating to the decision to have power over your feelings rather than be humble to them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in the process of wanting power over your feelings, you're going to create a set of beliefs that support your power over feelings, which includes belief about God, belief about the universe, hostile, belief about God, unkind, punishing, belief, all of which are not true, but they support your power over some hard feelings. You follow?
Yes. I think I don't want to get into that situation of being, what's the word, taken over. Overwhelm is the
Yeah, you keep saying that, and it's interesting. That must have happened in your
Yes.
childhood for you to keep saying that.
And for you to feel that God's going to have power over you when you feel,
Yeah.
which is a theme. Obviously there's issues in your childhood relating to power
And people having
emotion.
power over you.
Yeah.
And people taking power over you.
Yeah.
People wanting you to be submissive to them.
We
And
also,
otherwise you wouldn't keep saying the same words all
Yeah,
the time.
my
right?
basic feeling is I'm food. I'm just a function. I have to function, otherwise I'm whatever.
Yeah.
It's not about me, and it's
Can you
very
just hold the mic a little closer?
Oh, yeah,
It's-
sure.
It's hard
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
even my will to exist, so to say, is flawed, or is big. How can I say it's? How can I say taken over? I have to exist for someone, for, if you will, my mom or whatever. Just
Yeah.
But see how just can I say, it's very clear the way you're distancing yourself from your childhood experience, even in this conversation, and wanting, this is a very common thing that people do. It's God's laws that are creating this feeling of being
It's obviously about
overpowered.
your mother, right?
But you are deferring it onto God because that's preferable to you. Even the way you say it, it's like, oh, well, if you want to say it, it's mum, but that's not somewhere I'm going. It's God's problem.
Yeah.
actually, to me, it's a combination, because who allowed the whole thing, or who created the whole thing? There's a bigger.
Yes.
This is another disassembling that we do.
Yeah, it's a very common method.
Yeah.
But really what you're saying is mum and dad,
Yeah, well,
mum and dad did some things, right? And particularly with this attitude that you feel, which is I'm living for them, for their sake,
Yeah.
that I'm just for them.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the feeling they have, right? But you would rather blame it on God than feel your pain about them, right? And and again, this is creating power over the emotion you have with them by blaming God for what they did. So in other words, your mum and dad chose to sin. In their sin, they damaged you. God gave them free will, so it's all God's fault.
That's my logic, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if God didn't give them free will, or you free will, then you would not understand what self-awareness is. You wouldn't be a self-aware being. You would also not be able to feel happiness ever. You would not be able to feel any emotion ever if God never gave you free will. You'd just be like a robot. So at the end of the day, the gift of free will was necessary in order for you to experience joy. But the trouble with the gift of free will, you could say, if there is a trouble, is that humans use it badly. So who are you going to blame for humans using badly? Are you going to blame humans, which are the actual cause of them using it badly, or God? Now, it's very easy to blame God because it gets you away from working through your issues with humans.
Well, and two issues it gets you away with: how other people use their will to harm you, and then how you are going to use your will
to harm others.
To harm others or to deal with the harm that was done. When we do, oh, God, that's a crappy system, we blame God, we do two things. We deny the responsibility of our parents and what that effect that had on us, but we also deny responsibility for our choice to now deal with that and do better ourselves.
Yeah. So it gets you to have power over your feelings so much that in the end you distance yourself from your feelings completely through the beliefs that have been constructed. And this is a very dangerous thing to do, because in that place you'll end up sinning a lot. And in the process of sinning a lot, you're going to find the law is quite strict about your sins, right? Just as, by the way, the law is strict about your mum and dad's sins, right? They are going to be corrected for their sins towards you, but if you keep doing this, you will also create many sins in your life as well, which of course you will then need to be corrected for as well. Yeah. So this is where it gets down to the fact of it's like, at the end of the day, God demands, the law demands that I feel my stuff. It demands it. And it's going to demand it whether you will like it or not. So at some point, you've got to reverse the construction of beliefs that support you avoiding and actually start imbibing beliefs that support you dealing. And you can do that because you've imbibed a whole heap of beliefs that support you avoiding. So that means you're capable of creating beliefs that support you doing something. So why not create a whole heap of beliefs that support you dealing? It would make sense, wouldn't it, that you also can do that? Yep, and that's what I'd recommend you start doing. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Shall we have a break for lunch now? Yep. No worries.
So we'll come back at 2:15.
2:15?
Yep.
Thanks, guys.